Hello, my name is Mary Goldman, and I am the Design and Outreach Engineer for UCSC Xena, which is located at the UC Santa Cruz Genomics Institute. And I'm here to talk about user-centered design at UCSC Xena. So first, what is user-centered design? Usability.gov defines user-centered design as design that is based upon an explicit understanding of users, tasks, and environments, and is refined by user-centered evaluation. There's a couple parts of this definition that I want to highlight. The first is that it is design. So rather than kind of building it and seeing how it ends up in the end, you are from the beginning thinking about what do you want it to look like, what do you want it to feel like, and going from there. The next is that it is based upon an explicit understanding of users, tasks, and environments. So you're really thinking about who are the people that are going to be using this application? What are the things that they're going to be doing with it? What are their goals? What are their tasks? And what are the environments in which they're going to be using it? Maybe they're going to be using it in a clinical setting where they don't have easy access to the web. It's important to think about these things ahead of time. And then lastly, it's refined by user-centered evaluation. So going to the people who are going to be using this tool and seeing if the tool is actually meeting their needs as it was designed. So something that I kind of hinted at by where I got this definition, usability.gov, is that user-centered design is actually a well-known, well-studied field. There's about 3 decades of research going into it. There are many people with college degrees in user-centered design, as well as jobs and positions whose whole job is user-centered design. It has not been very well known within the bioinformatics tool development community. And so my goal is to show the benefits of user-centered design and how it can help you to create a better bioinformatics tool. And I'm not the only person who is taking note of the benefits that user-centered design can offer a tool. This is a paper that was written in PLOS Computational Biology, 10 Simple Rules for Researchers Who Want to Develop Web Apps. This was published in January of 2022. And the very first rule that they start with is start with user-centered design. So what are the benefits of user-centered design? But before I get into that, I just want to make a note that the benefits that we're going to talk about here are for virtually any bioinformatics tool. I know that the PLOS Computational Biology paper was focused on web applications, and UCSC Xena is also a web application, but these benefits can be for, as I say, virtually any bioinformatics tool. It can work for web tools, it can work for desktop tools, it can work for visual tools, and it can even work for text-based tools and command line tools. For those of you who use the command line, you know that some tools are relatively easy to use compared to others, and user-centered design can help you to create those command line tools that are just a little bit more user-friendly. So what are some of the benefits? The first benefit I want to talk about is that it's going to make a more user-friendly site. And this has a number of side benefits. The first is that less documentation is going to be needed. When we first started our new interface to have people start to create a Xena visualization, we had here step 1, step 2, step 3. And while I do have documentation on how to go through these 3 steps, it's pretty minimal because the steps themselves are fairly self-explanatory. And so in general, people don't get stuck. You have fewer questions on the mailing list or the forum or however you provide for people to get a hold of you. Fewer questions is fewer work for you to go out and start helping those people. In general, you'll have more users if your site is easy to use. people will recommend it to their friends, and their friends will recommend it to their friends, and you'll end up with more users. And then last is kind of a interesting concept that I hadn't thought of when I first started doing user-centered design, which is that when you design up front, it means that there are fewer fixes, fewer changes to the interface later on. The interface that you first go out with tends to stick around for longer. And as we all know, an interface that changes less is going to result in happier users. People don't have to learn the new interface every time you update it. Another benefit of user-centered design is that it saves developer time. And this kind of goes back to that same thing that I was talking about before, which is that if you design and refine the tool before you implement it, so rather than designing it as you're implementing it, it's going to result in fewer fixes later on, and then that's going to result in less time that you need to spend coding. And then the last benefit I want to talk about for user-centered design is that you end up with a tool that really addresses user needs. You can create innovative tools that can really advance the field by thinking about the users and what problems they're facing. And in general, you'll have more fruitful collaborations. So hopefully I've convinced you of some of the benefits of user-centered design. And now let's talk about when should you do user-centered design. And a lot of people think about user-centered design in this way. So you'll have an idea of a tool that you want to create, a new feature that you want to add. You'll build it and make it happen. And then you'll come in with your user-centered design pixie dust and sprinkle it all over the tool that you've created to make it more user-friendly, and then you'll release it. And unfortunately, if you do user-centered design in this way, you're really going to miss out on a lot of the benefits of user-centered design. User-centered design is really a paradigm, and it's something that you actually apply to all aspects of the project, from the idea phase to the build phase to the release phase. So for instance, in the idea phase, you might start asking questions. You have your idea, but who are the people that are going to use this tool, and what are their needs? When you're building the tool, you might do something like taking time to make the designs rather than just building it as you go. And then when you release it, you might ask someone to take a look at it and see if it actually is meeting the user needs as you intended. So now I want to talk about two examples of user-centered design for UCSC Xena, so you can kind of get a feel for how we apply it here for this tool. The first example is zooming on UCSC Xena. So just a little bit of background on our visual spreadsheet. This is a visualization that we offer on Xena, and it builds a view that you can see an example of down at the bottom, where you have columns of genomic or clinical data on many rows of samples. And it's a great way to see many different types of multi-omic data all together on a large group of samples. The way that you used to zoom on Xena was that you would click to zoom in. This was not particularly intuitive. And in fact, it was actually easy to accidentally zoom in just as you're moving your mouse over the visual spreadsheet. And we noticed this both in workshops and also when just when we were using it too. Additionally, the indication that you had zoomed was pretty faint and hard to see. You can see at the end of this clip here, it says they click to zoom, and then at the top it says you've zoomed to these rows. Then to zoom out, you would shift click, Again, not particularly intuitive and not shared by very many other applications. Shift clicking to zoom out is not something other applications, either bioinformatics or otherwise, do. And then we had a pop-up that showed people how to zoom out, but we noticed just anecdotally that people would often close the pop-up without actually reading it. So we thought, okay, well, our zooming is a little unintuitive, but we have so many other things that we need to work on. How do we know if this is actually a priority? And so we decided to use Google Analytics to examine user behavior. And this is an example of the user-centered design concept of watching somebody use it. So we looked at our Google Analytics, and to our dismay, we saw that zooming was the very first top event. These events are the main analyses and visualizations that you can build with Xena, and these were secondary to zooming. And so, while we expect some people to zoom every once in a while, these events should really be at the top. So we decided, okay, let's develop a new prototype here. This is an example of the user-centered design concept of making designs. Our design is this one. And so we click and drag to zoom in. So this is very similar to other applications, for instance, the Genome browser. And then there's also a visual indication that you have zoomed. So that's that gray bar that appears as you click and drag. And then in general, we just added more indications that you had zoomed, including a little notification at the top. Instead of in gray, we added it in black. And then to zoom out, you would just click the X at the top. Again, you don't have to remember to hold the Shift key. And so we hoped that this would be a little more intuitive. But one of the questions we had was that, okay, so we've created this prototype, but is it actually more user-friendly? And what we decided to do was employ the user-centered design concept of watching somebody use it. So what we did was we took 3 people from the neighboring labs. We just went in and said, hey, can we grab 20 minutes of your time? Yeah, it's no problem. You haven't used Xena. And we just asked them to, quote, look a little more closely at breakpoints for a gene fusion. So gave them a task that would ask them to zoom. The results were that everyone could zoom in and realize they had zoomed. So that was an improvement and a good thing. But only 1 of 3 people could figure out how to zoom out. So we decided to refine the zooming out. And the final design that we went with is that you click and drag to zoom in. We also added some help text at the top, encouraging people to click and drag to zoom in on a column. And then to zoom out, we added 2 pieces of text here at the top. We added them in blue so that it drew a little bit more attention to themselves. And then the 2 of them, the 2 options are you can zoom out, which is an incremental zoom out, or you can clear the zoom and just go back to your original view. So it gives the user more options there. So we released this to production, and after we did that, Google Analytics showed that people were still zooming, so they were understanding how to zoom, but they were performing more of those analyses that we hoped that people would use Xena for. So much better. The next example I want to talk about is redesigning our chart mode. So our motivation for this is that, so chart mode is a view mode that we have that allows people to make box plots and violin plots and bar charts and just a wide variety of different graphs. And we noticed in workshops that people were struggling to make a chart. And the reason why, and I apologize for the blurry picture of our old interface here, is that we would have people choose a column for the X and Y axes. And you would choose a column of data from the screen, but those X and Y axes don't match people's questions. For instance, a question might be, what is the difference between the samples in group A and group B? And so people didn't know how to select columns that were going to give them the graphs that they were interested in. And in fact, even the Xena team would struggle with this sometimes. I often used to select something for the X and Y axis, and then I would need to flip them because I hadn't created the graph that I was interested in. So how did we come up with some new designs? We use the user-centered design concept of thinking about our users. So we started by reviewing user feedback from a couple of different sources. We just watched users in workshops, and we had been doing this, so we just took our anecdotal evidence and put it together in writing so that we had it there. We looked at mailing list questions. What were people asking about the chart mode? And then we also took direct feedback from power users, including people on the team. So people who use Xena frequently, what sort of things were they struggling with? And then we used this feedback to brainstorm some new designs. And this is a user-centered design concept of making the designs. When we made the designs, we did this via 2 brainstorming sessions with our internal team. We just made up some quick sketches in Google Slides, and we actually came up with 15 different design ideas, 15 different ways that people could interact with our application to create different charts. We then narrowed those designs, again with the internal team, based on just general best practices from other applications, both bioinformatic applications and other applications on the web. And then we also narrowed it down by how easy it would be to implement. We didn't want to come up with some design that was really fancy and slick, but was going to be really difficult for our development team to put into practice. So how do we know which design is best? And this is going to be the user-centered design concept of watching somebody use it. So we built prototypes of our best design ideas that we had. And then we used a tool called Balsamiq to build quick, clickable prototypes. And you can see a screenshot of what a prototype looks like there on the right. And you can see it kind of has a kind of cartoony feel to it. And this is intentional. By having this kind of cartoony look to it, it encourages users to give more frank feedback because it doesn't feel finished. A lot of times, if you present designs that look very polished and are how it's going to look in production, people feel, oh, it's already done. Even though this isn't working for me, it's too late. They've already put it together. So by having it look unfinished, it encourages more authentic feedback. We then took those designs to some user interviews. So we recruited people from the mailing list. If you had written in maybe with a question about chart or just in general, we emailed you and asked if you wanted to give some feedback on some new designs. We had a 1-hour interview with each person. We gave them a task and just watched them use each of the new designs to complete that task. And we asked them to think aloud as they were going through them. The results of the interviews. So we had 2 primary designs that we were testing. So we had this kind of what we called the wizard prototype, which involved a lot more clicking. Basically ask, well, what do you want to do? Okay, what do you want to see here? Okay, what do you want it to look like? Okay, and then they would show the graph. The other prototype is what we call the show all prototype. And it involved a lot less clicking. Basically, we would just show all the different possible graphs that you could create with the data on the screen. And then we kind of know which graphs are a little bit more popular with our users. And so we had those as suggested graphs at the top, but they could click through to any of the graphs. And so we showed them to people. And surprisingly, the wizard prototype was the much more popular prototype, despite it having a lot more clicking involved. And what ended up happening was that users felt empowered to make the graphs that they wanted. So you can see the quote here down at the bottom from a user in the interview. What do you want to do? There's that sense that you have control over what is being made. I like that you go through the process yourself. And then also interestingly, users said that it could make the most different types of graphs, which was kind of an interesting finding because it made the same types of graphs as the other prototype. They actually had the same exact functionality, but something about this prototype, this wizard prototype, made people feel like we had a lot more functionality. So we released it to our production site, and we can see in Google Analytics that people are creating more graphs than they were before and spending more time looking at those graphs. We have also reduced the time required to teach how to use chart view in our workshops. Before, it took us about 30 minutes to teach people how to use it. Now we're down to 10 minutes, so it's just easier to use. And then we haven't had any questions on the mailing list on the new designs. So hopefully I've given you a feel for how user-centered design could work in your for your tool. I want to wrap up and cover some of the user-centered design concepts that we employ here at Xena. But before I do that, I want to just address something. A lot of times I hear this from people, oh, that's so great that you do it, but I just don't have the time, I don't have the money, the effort, et cetera, to do user-centered design. There's just too much on my plate to add in any of these tools. And I would like to just tell you a quote. This is by Scott Clemmer for an online course that I took at UC San Diego, which is that while great design takes a lot of creativity, time, and energy, pretty good design is much easier and can be accomplished with some basic tools. So if you're trying to create some completely innovative new way to do XYZ, yes, that's going to take a lot of work. But if you're just trying to make your site a little more user-friendly, be able to satisfy user needs a little bit more, that's going to be a lot easier. And there's some really easy to use tools that are going to help you to do that. And then I'd like to just add my own 2 cents, which is that something is better than nothing. So even just taking, small baby steps in the user-centered design space is going to help you to reap those benefits of user-centered design. So the first concept I want to talk about is just thinking about your users. Who am I designing for and what are their specific needs? You really want to put yourself in their shoes as much as you can. And if possible, even talk to somebody just to see who they are, what are their needs, what are their tasks, what are their goals, what environments are they working in. I want to caution people that if you do talk to people, to not pitch your idea up front. Oh, I have a brand new tool, I'm so excited about it. Or I have a new feature, it's going to be really great. If you start talking about the new thing that you're working on, there's a lot of peer pressure to agree that it's awesome and that they're definitely going to use it. So I'd caution you to not do that to start with. And just additionally, people in general are a poor judge of what they'll do in the future. If you ask me, am I going to go to the gym 3 times next week? I definitely am. May not actually make it all 3 times, right? And then the link in the slides is a warning story from Walmart where they asked people, oh, would you like to have more spacious and uncluttered aisles? And people said, oh, I would love that. But then when they went through and they did that, their sales went down. So, pitching your idea, at least upfront, might result in something like this. So a first step that you might take when thinking about your users is to just think about the people you know who would need a tool like the one you're making. Think about, who are they? What are their skill sets? Do they use Excel? Do they use the command line? And what are their goals that they're trying to solve here? A next step that you could take would be to talk to one potential user. Things you can do, you can ask about their research, what skills they have again, what is their current workflow? So what other tools are they already using in this step to accomplish their goal? What pain points do they have? Oh, I always have to copy and paste this, and then write up your findings. And then another step you could take would be to do that same thing, but to talk to even more people. So not just one person, but a couple of people. And again, write up your findings. I want to highlight just one thing that's in common with all these steps that you can take, which is to write up your findings. This is actually an important part of this concept of thinking about your users. If you think about people abstractly and kind of go through this process, it's not going to be as beneficial to you. By writing down what who your users are, it's going to cement this better for you. And it's going to give you something that you can go back to. So say you've created your tool and now people are asking for a new feature. You can go back to this and say, okay, is this feature, as I'm thinking about it, going to help my users? And then additionally, it can be helpful for people for showing to management and that sort of thing, helping to get everybody on the same page about who it is that you are trying to design this tool for. The second concept I want to talk about is making the design. So what is this tool going to look like? What is this new feature going to look like? I encourage you to try to do more than one design. Typically, your first idea is not your best idea. So if you just do one, it may not end up in you might miss out on another design idea, your second one that would be even better. In general, I encourage you to use best practices from other applications. So this can be other bioinformatics tools, or it can even be tools outside of bioinformatics. It's important to be consistent with the names of things, the button location, et cetera, et cetera. Consistency is going to help people to understand how to navigate through your application. And it's important to do this not only within your app, but also with other common apps that they might be using. I strongly encourage you to do at least basic accessibility, similar to other accessibility things such as curb cuts on sidewalks. When you do basic accessibility, it's going to help the site for everybody. Some ways that you can make designs. One of my favorites actually is just a paper and a pencil. And this is coming from someone who does not have very good drawing skills. In fact, very poor drawing skills. But the great thing about paper and pencil is that it's really low pressure. You can kind of just draw something and then say, oh, that looks like that might be good. Or no, forget this. Let's move on to the next idea. So it's a really easy way to come up with some new ideas. Google Slides and PowerPoint are also great ways to come up with, as ways to create designs. And then there's also tools like Balsamiq that I mentioned that'll allow you to kind of create those kind of cartoony designs to help you and potentially even to show to somebody else. So a first step would be to just make a single design and to leave and come back after a period of time with some fresh eyes and just evaluate your design. Does it seem like it's looking like what is going to help your users? The next step would be to make 2 designs, so more than one. Again, step away, come back, evaluate your designs. Maybe there's part of one design and part of another design that are gonna work well together. And then another step you could take would be to make even more designs, 2 or more, and then to show those designs to somebody, a coworker, a user, and to get some feedback on them. The last concept I want to talk about is watching somebody use it. So thinking, who can I get to just try this out? The great thing is that even with one person looking at your designs or your tool, you will have learned almost a third of what there is to know about the usability of a design. And this is research that was done in the 90s here. So you don't need to show it to a lot of people to get some really good feedback on how user-friendly your design actually is. It can be for a site that is in production, or it can be for a design or a prototype that you've made, even a paper and pencil one. Just showing it to someone and seeing what they think can help you to just see things that maybe you didn't see when you first looked. I would encourage you, when you're watching somebody to use it, to not instruct them how to use the tool, as tempting as it is. Remember that when somebody is going to be using your tool, you're not going to be there side by side with them to tell them where to click and where to go, right? And so I encourage you, when you're watching someone to use it, to try not to instruct them as well. It's also very tempting to ask leading questions. So for instance, if you have completely redesigned where the buttons are to try to make it easier for people to go through, you could say like, oh, what do you think of the new buttons? And people are going to be less frank in their feedback, knowing that you have put maybe a lot of effort into these buttons. And so, an alternative question that you could ask would be, do you have any thoughts about the buttons? And keeping a little bit less excitement in your voice, and then people will tell you a little more authentically what they think. A first step would be to just watch a coworker or grab somebody in the hall and just watch them use it. Even though they may not be your target user, they may not have the same goals, and they might not be the environment that they're going to ultimately use it in. They're still going to have a different perspective on the application, on the design, on the prototype. If it's already in production, you can also use Google Analytics to get a sense of how people are using the tool. Another step could be to watch a user use it, so track down somebody. You can show that to them virtually or in person. And then another step would be to watch more than one user use it, again, either virtually or in person. And I would encourage you you don't actually need that many people to look at it. The standard for the field outside of bioinformatics community is 3 to 5 people. So it's actually not that many people. Once you start showing it to more people than that, they encourage you to go back and refine your designs and to start going from there. I want to give an aside about how to find users. A lot of people say, but how do you find people? And I would encourage you to just ask somebody. I have found again and again, surprisingly, but truly, most people are very happy to donate some time to help you out. A lot of people find it flattering. They're excited to be the beta testers, and that their opinion really is valued. They're an expert. The tool is going to be really designed especially for them. And then a lot of people enjoy it as a way to give back to the tool, a tool that might be really helpful for them. It's a way to give back to you. Some sources for users are people who wrote into the mailing list or sent you an email with a question about it. You can reply back and say, answer their question and then say, if you have some time, I have some new designs I'd love to show you. No worries if not. Also, if somebody talked to you at a poster or a conference presentation, you can ask them. And then I've also had good success with students in bioinformatics classes and labs at your institution or campus. They may not be people who are already using your tool, but they can still give you a fresh insight into the usability of your tool. And then I would just encourage you to remember that this is a way to find users, but even coworkers, people from the hallway, people from adjacent labs are really better than nothing. So if you can't find a user, even these people are going to give you fresh eyes. So in conclusion, user-centered design is worth the effort. There's a lot of benefits to user-centered design, including a more user-friendly site with all the downstream benefits from that one. You will save developer time. And then you're going to end up with a tool that really addresses user needs, right? Some user-centered design concepts that you can apply in your tool development are to think about the users, to make designs, and then to watch somebody use it. And remember that even small efforts are going to be worthwhile. They're going to start, you're going to start seeing the benefits with even just small steps. And with that, I would like to thank you.